What if I told you that trying to be perfectly coldly logical is actually just as destructive as completely losing your temper?
Oh, yeah. It's a huge myth.
Right. We're taught our whole lives that logic is the ultimate goal, like the mature way to handle any crisis. But today, we are completely dismantling the myth of pure logic.
It's so pervasive, too.
Yeah.
We tend to view the human mind as this binary switch. You're either an emotional wreck or you're a perfectly rational machine.
But treating yourself like a machine usually guarantees that you're going to break down.
Exactly. You just can't sustain it.
So welcome to the deep dive. Our mission today is to explore a framework that really shatters that binary. We're pulling from Dialectical Behavior Therapy, or DBT.
Which is such a powerful modality.
It really is. And it's a topic we dissect quite a bit over on the DBT Me platform. It really centers on finding this middle path that, frankly, most of us were just never taught exists.
Yeah, we were completely left in the dark on it.
And I want to speak directly to you listening right now. We know the exhaustion of this trap. It is so terrifying when intense emotions just take over and completely hijack your brain.
Oh, absolutely.
But on the flip side, the sheer exhaustion of trying to shut your emotions down entirely, like policing your own mind so you don't feel anything, that drains the life right out of you.
Which is exactly why we have to start by defining what the word dialectical actually means in this context.
Yeah.
Because it's not just, clinical jargon.
Right. It sounds a little academic at first.
It does.
Yeah.
But a dialectic is really just the concept of holding two seemingly opposite truths at the exact same time without forcing one to destroy the other.
I love that.
Yeah. So in this case, it means accepting your intense emotional reality as entirely valid while simultaneously pushing yourself to change your behavioral reaction. You don't have to choose between feeling and thinking.
You can actually have both. And we have a really compelling stack of sources for this deep dive today. We're looking at foundational texts by Dr. Marshall Linehan.
The creator of DBT.
Right, exactly. Along with some really fascinating neuroimaging studies that prove this isn't just fluffy philosophy, it's actual biology.
Measurable changes in the brain.
Yeah. But to understand the synthesis, we should probably quickly map out the two extremes we're actually synthesizing, because anyone who follows this topic knows the exhausting whiplash of bouncing between them.
For sure. So in the DBT framework, those extremes are called states of mind. And the first one is emotion mind.
Okay, lay that out for us.
This is when the limbic system, so the emotional center of the brain, is entirely in the driver's seat. Your mood, your fears, or like your sudden urges are dictating your actions.
And the logic is just gone.
The logical part of your brain is essentially locked in the trunk.
That's the classic scenario of, drafting a blistering, deeply unfair text message to a partner because you're hurting, and just hitting send without a single thought about the consequences.
Oh, we've all been there. The emotion feels like the absolute, undeniable truth in that split second.
It feels so justified.
It does. But because that state is so volatile, it creates chaos. Which leads us to the swing in the complete opposite direction, which is reasonable mind.
The overcorrection.
Exactly. After the fallout of an emotional blowout, people often retreat into this fortress of pure, cold logic. They look only at facts, data, logistics.
They decide emotions are the enemy.
Right, so they attempt to ignore their own human needs entirely.
It's like the ultimate self-invalidation. You create this mathematically perfect, hyper-productive daily schedule that maps out every minute of your day.
I've done that.
Same. But then you're absolutely miserable trying to execute it because it completely ignores the fact that you require rest or joy or just like flexibility.
And the overarching problem here is what clinicians call the flip-flop cycle. Emotion mind creates a mess. To fix the mess, you retreat into the rigid perfectionism of reasonable mind.
But the dam eventually breaks.
Exactly. Because reasonable mind ignores your fundamental human needs, the psychological pressure just builds up behind that dam. Eventually it shatters, and you plunge right back into emotion mind for another blowout.
It is so exhausting. It's honestly like being trapped in a car with two terrible drivers who keep fighting over the steering wheel.
That's a great way to put it.
Right. Like when emotion mind is driving, they aggressively stomp on the gas pedal, completely ignoring the cliff up ahead.
They're just reacting.
Yeah. And then reasonable mind wrestles the wheel away, but they only stare at the GPS. Like, they're so obsessed with the map on the screen that they completely ignore the actual road conditions, the pouring rain, or the fact that the car is running out of gas.
Right. Either way, you're heading for a crash.
Yeah.
That analogy captures the mechanics perfectly. Both of those states have a narrow evolutionary purpose in really specific, isolated
But
situations.
not for everyday life.
No, over-applying them to the complexities of daily life guarantees immense suffering.
If this deep dive is helping you understand Wise Mind, hit like and subscribe to DBT Me. We go deep on DBT skills that can actually change your life.
So, to get out of that car crash, DBT introduces the synthesis of the dialectic, which is wise mind.
The middle path.
Yes, this is the integration of both reason and emotion, layered with a sense of inner intuition or like a deep knowing.
But wait, I have to challenge this premise for a second.
Go for it.
If reasonable mind is based purely on facts and data, why isn't that the ideal state? Like, in a crisis, shouldn't we want cold, hard logic to take over completely to solve the problem? Why do we even need the messy emotion?
That is a brilliant philosophical question, honestly. And the answer really comes down to what actually drives human behavior. Logic is fantastic for laying out your options.
Okay,
It
yeah.
can tell you the statistical probability of different outcomes, but logic cannot tell you which outcome actually matters.
Oh, interesting.
Yet logic doesn't contain values. Emotion is what assigns weight and meaning to our choices.
So without it, we're just calculating without caring.
Precisely. If you remove emotion entirely, you don't get a perfectly rational genius. You get someone who is either paralyzed by indecision, because all choices hold equal logical weight, or someone who acts sociopathically, just ignoring the human cost of their actions.
Wow, that makes so much sense. Logic gives you the map, but emotion tells you where you actually want to travel.
I love that. Yes, wise mind is the state where you honor both.
So how does that look in practice?
Well, say your boss sends you a wildly unfair, critical email. Reasonable mind might say, the logical thing is to stay quiet so I don't get fired.
Right, just swallow it.
Emotion mind says, I'm going to reply all and tell them exactly how incompetent they are right now.
Which feels amazing for about 2 seconds.
Exactly. But wise mind acknowledges the absolute fact of the power dynamic, the logic, while fully validating the intense anger and injustice you feel the emotion.
It holds both.
Right. It allows you to craft a response that protects your job,
Yeah.
but also sets a firm boundary.
But looking at the source material, there seem to be some major misconceptions about what wise mind actually looks like when you're trying to do it.
Oh, huge misconceptions. The literature highlights two massive pitfalls. The first mistake people make is believing that accessing wise mind means you have to, like, kill your emotions.
Like becoming a Zen master who never gets mad.
Right. They think, if I'm truly being wise, I shouldn't feel angry anymore. But that is just reasonable mind wearing a disguise. You're still going to feel the anger, you just won't be entirely consumed by it.
That is such a relief to hear. And the second mistake.
The assumption that to access wise mind, you have to go sit in a quiet, dimly lit room, light some incense, and formally meditate for an hour.
Which nobody has time for in a crisis.
Exactly. While formal mindfulness is a great foundational practice, wise mind is highly practical. It's a state you can learn to access in seconds while standing in the middle of a crowded grocery store or, like, a tense board meeting.
I am putting myself in the shoes of the listener right now, and I just have to ask, how is that physically possible?
What do you mean?
Like, if I'm at a 10 out of 10 on the emotional scale, if my heart is pounding, my palms are sweating, and I am literally vibrating with rage over that email, how does my logic even get a word in? Isn't my brain already hijacked at that point?
Oh, your brain is absolutely hijacked.
Yeah.
At that level of arousal, the nervous system has interpreted a mortal threat before the rational thinking part of your brain has even had time to boot up.
The cortisol and adrenaline are already flooding the system.
Exactly. So to understand how we overcome this, we have to look past just the psychology and examine the physical hardware of the brain itself.
This is where the deep dive gets really profound for me. We aren't just talking about abstract therapy concepts here. We're talking about measurable neuroplasticity.
The neuroimaging research here is just undeniable. Let's look at the 2016 study by Koenig and colleagues.
Yeah, let's get into the data.
They didn't just ask patients how they felt after completing DBT. They looked at the actual structure of their brains using fMRI scans.
Which is wild.
It really is. And what they found was that consistently practicing DBT skills actually leads to structural changes in the prefrontal cortex.
And just to ground us, the prefrontal cortex is the brain's logical impulse control center, right? It's like the manager of the brain that thinks about long-term consequences.
Yes, exactly. The seat of executive functioning.
Hmm.
Koenig's study demonstrated that through the practice of these specific emotional regulation skills, the gray matter density in the prefrontal cortex physically increases.
Wait, really? It physically
The
changes.
structure literally thickens. You are building a stronger neurological braking system.
So how does that happen? I mean, is it instantaneous?
Not at all. Think of it like hacking a path through a really dense jungle.
Okay.
The very first time you try to access wise mind, instead of giving in to an emotional outburst, you're swinging a dull machete through thick vines. It is exhausting, and you might fail.
It feels impossible at first.
Right. But every single time you choose the wise mind response, you clear that path a little more. Over time, the brain reinforces those specific neural pathways until that jungle trail becomes a paved highway.
Wow.
The electrical signals just travel faster and more efficiently.
That is such a powerful visual. But what about the other side of the equation? Like, we're strengthening the logical manager, but what happens to the alarm bell?
That brings us to a foundational meta-analysis by Hoffman and colleagues from 2012. They looked at the long-term efficacy of DBT, specifically focusing on the amygdala.
Okay, the amygdala?
Yeah, the amygdala is the brain's fear and emotional reactivity center. It's the literal alarm bell that triggers that flood of adrenaline we talked about.
And people who struggle with intense emotional dysregulation often have a hyperactive amygdala, right? Like it rings too loudly too often.
Exactly. A minor slight is interpreted neurologically as a tiger attack.
Right.
Hoffman's research showed that completing DBT leads to a lasting long-term reduction in amygdala hyperactivity.
It actually calms it down.
Yes. The baseline level of reactivity drops. The alarm bell physically becomes less sensitive to minor triggers.
So for you listening right now, what does this actually mean? It means you are not broken and your current reactions are not permanent.
Exact.
Practicing wise mind physically builds a wider, stronger bridge between the feeling center and the thinking center of your brain. Over time, the alarm bell gets quieter, the logical manager gets stronger, and they communicate with each other far more efficiently.
You are fundamentally upgrading your neural networks. But, as you pointed out earlier, knowing that your brain can change over months or years doesn't really help you when that furious text message is half-typed on your phone right now.
Right. We know the destination, but how do we force the shift in the heat of the moment? Like when the jungle is thick and the machete is heavy, how do we access this upgraded hardware?
That is where the practical application of DBT skills comes in. These are actionable tools designed to force the nervous system out of that hijacked state. Let's start with the STOP skill.
I've heard of the STOP acronym, but honestly, in the heat of the moment, the concept of stopping feels like entirely impossible. How does it actually work?
You're completely right to point out how difficult the first step is.
Yeah.
The acronym is STOP, take a step back, observe, proceed mindfully.
Okay.
The first letter, S, requires a hard physical freeze. When you feel that overwhelming urge to hit send on the text, you don't just tell yourself to calm down. You physically drop the phone. You freeze your muscles. You literally stop the motor action.
Okay, so it's a physical interrupt.
Yes. Then you take a step back, which can be mental or physical. Literally leave the room if you have to.
Just create distance.
Exactly. Then comes observe, and this is the crucial mechanism. You aren't just looking around the room. You observe your internal state as a detached witness.
Like noticing what's happening in your body.
Right. You say to yourself, my chest is tight, my breathing is shallow, my jaw is clenched.
Ah, I see what you're doing there. By naming the physical sensations, you're forcing the prefrontal cortex to turn back on. You are shifting from being the emotion to observing the emotion.
Yes, the act of labeling an emotion neurologically dampens the amygdala. From that slightly more grounded place, you can then ask your wise mind how to proceed mindfully rather than just reacting impulsively.
That makes perfect sense for a moderate trigger. But let's go to the extreme. What if you're so far gone, like so completely overwhelmed by panic or rage that you can't even remember what STOP stands for?
When your emotional arousal is at an absolute peak, cognitive tools like the STOP skill often just fail because the prefrontal cortex is completely offline.
Right, the manager has left the building.
Exactly. That is when you need the TIPP skill. TIPP. This is pure biological manipulation. The most powerful component is the T, which stands for temperature.
I have read about this, and the mechanism is fascinating. This involves cold water, right?
Yes. When you're in a state of extreme distress, you hold your breath and splash freezing cold water on your face, particularly around the eyes and cheeks, or you literally submerge your face in a bowl of cold water for about 30 seconds.
And the reason this works isn't just because cold water is shocking, right? It's a really specific evolutionary response.
The biology here is incredible. When cold water hits the trigeminal nerve on your face while you are holding your breath, it triggers what is known as the mammalian diving reflex.
That is so
It
cool.
really is. Your body instinctively assumes you're diving deep into freezing water. To conserve oxygen for your vital organs, it automatically activates the vagus nerve, which forces your parasympathetic nervous system to take over.
So it rapidly slows down your heart rate and forces your body to physically calm down, entirely bypassing your racing thoughts.
Exactly.
It is literally a biological CTRL Alt-Delete to force restart a frozen, overwhelmed nervous system. You are using a hardwired physiological survival reflex to override a psychological panic attack.
It's basically a hack. And once you've brought the physiological arousal down from a 10 to, say, a 5 using temperature, your brain is no longer in a state of sheer emergency.
The executive function comes back online.
Exactly. And from there, you can use Marsha Linehan's foundational breathing technique to actually locate wise mind.
Walk us through the mechanism of that breathing technique.
It creates a specific rhythm of inquiry. You sit quietly, and as you draw a slow breath in, you silently ask your inner self the question, is this wise mind?
Okay, on the inhale.
Right. And as you exhale, you simply listen. You don't formulate an argument. You don't make a pros and cons list. You just ask on the inhale and listen on the exhale.
That is so profoundly different from reasonable mind. Reasonable mind would be aggressively interrogating the situation, right? Demanding an immediate logical solution.
Exactly, treating it like a math problem.
But this breathing technique is just creating an open space for the intuition to surface on its own.
You're inviting the integration of your thoughts and feelings rather than trying to force one to dominate the other. It takes practice, but the answer that arises in that space is almost always clearer, calmer, and more aligned with your actual values.
Subscribe to DBT Me and share this with someone who needs it. If these skills are helping you in a YouTube video, imagine what a full DBT program with a trained therapist could do for you.
The more you utilize these interventions, whether it's the cognitive interrupt of the STOP skill or the biological reset of the TIPP skill, the more you are actively participating in your own neuroplasticity. You are building that highway.
Let's take a step back and look at the landscape we've covered today. We started by validating just how exhausting it is to be trapped in the flip-flop cycle between emotion mind, where feelings drive you off the cliff, and reasonable mind, where cold logic ignores your humanity.
Such an exhausting loop.
We explored the dialectic, the ability to hold two opposing truths and find the middle path. We looked at the profound neuroscience from Koenig and Hoffman, proving that we can actually thicken our prefrontal cortex and quiet our amygdala.
The physical proof.
Exactly. And finally, we broke down the mechanisms of the STOP and TIPP skills to physically force that shift in the heat of the moment.
Just a reminder, this is educational content for personal growth, not therapy. If in crisis, call or text 988. To find a certified DBT therapist, visit behavioraltech.org.
As we wrap up this deep dive, I want to leave you with something to really mull over. We've spent this time talking about wise mind as an internal tool. You know, how to handle our own anger, our anxiety, or a conflict with a partner.
Right, the internal landscape.
But what happens when we apply this framework to the external world?
Oh, the implications are massive, especially when you look at the digital landscape we navigate every single day.
Yeah, let's talk about that.
The architecture of the internet, social media algorithms, the relentless 24-hour news cycle, these systems are not designed for your well-being. They are engineered by highly paid data scientists to trigger your emotion mind.
Because outrage and anxiety drive engagement. They
Yeah.
want you terrified or furious because that keeps you clicking, scrolling, and commenting.
The entire digital economy runs on keeping you in emotion mind. So imagine applying wise mind as a shield against that manipulation.
Wow.
How would your daily life change if you recognized when an algorithm was trying to hijack your amygdala? What if, before you doom scrolled for another hour or engaged in a toxic online debate, you used the STOP skill?
What a powerful shift in perspective. Curating your digital life from a place of wise mind. You acknowledge the facts of what is happening in the world and you validate your emotional reaction to it, but you don't allow a tech company's algorithm to dictate your behavioral response.
It brings the power entirely back to you. You're choosing what to engage with based on your deep values rather than just reacting to the loudest, most intense stimuli on your feed.
It goes right back to the beginning. You don't have to surrender entirely to the emotional chaos, and you don't have to become a cold, unfeeling robot to survive it.
There's a middle path.
There is a middle path. You can forge that trail through the jungle, you can change your brain's hardware, and you can find your wise